Well, it's been 204 days since Mark Carney became Prime Minister, and he was elected in substantial part based on his promise to fight back against Donald Trump's tariffs in two ways. Number one, to remove internal trade barriers, and number two, to expand markets for Canadian goods and services. And by far, the biggest export Canada has in terms of value is our oil. But will Mark Carney allow the oil patch to develop? Will he allow any new pipelines to be made? Joining us now to talk about this is someone who might know. It's the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, great to see you again.
Hi, Ezra.
You put to the Prime Minister a proposal that I think has a bit of everything. It's got major oil and gas companies interested. It's got Indigenous participation, and it even has something that would appeal to the lefties, carbon capture. I'm a bit of a skeptic about that myself, but you've thrown everyone a bone. What has Mark Carney said in response to your good faith initiative to develop the oil patch?
Well, I'll find out more this week. I do have a bargaining team that has been meeting with his bargaining team over the last couple of months. And one of the things that we identified, I've been calling it the grand bargain. Let's find a way to get new bitumen pipelines built, particularly one to the Northwest BC coast. If we want to develop any new markets, that's the place to go. I know he's quite keen on the Pathways project, which has been put forward by our largest oil sands companies as a carbon neutral by 2050 project. But the main thing of the three-part plan is that we've got to get rid of the 9 terrible laws that are impacting the investment climate. Because if the only way to get a pipeline built in this country is through federal taxpayer dollars, then the exercise will be a failure. What we have to do is get to a point where the private sector feels confidence that a project can be approved, permitted, and built so that those private dollars come back. And at the moment, we haven't seen enough movement to make that happen.
I've seen some response from establishment liberals saying, well, this isn't a real proposal. There's no real money in it. No one's committing. And I think the obvious answer is, yeah, because it's literally impossible for a decade with the tanker ban and the gender analysis on pipelines. So I think no one would be crazy enough to do this. I think what you're doing is sort of calling the bluff of the Prime Minister. But it's not just him. Let me play for you a 45-second clip of Premier Eby from British Columbia. Just shocking. I mean, and I would remind our viewers that matters like interprovincial pipelines and ports are subject to federal jurisdiction. But listen to this little tin pot dictator. Here's Premier Eby.
To put that tanker ban at threat, it's not just a threat to our pristine coast that so many British Columbians, including myself, value, but it is a direct economic threat to the kind of economy that we're trying to build in the country here. And so when I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with, I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross unless the Albertan government and the federal Canadian government are committing billions of taxpayer dollars to build this project. And if that is the plan, then they should be transparent about it. Don't mistake my politeness for weakness on protecting our economy and our coast.
Well, what do you think of that, Premier? I mean, he's basically saying, I'm against this. This is me being polite. He's implying that he might be ruder. No one really cares about that, but it's the legality or the illegality that has my attention. What do you think?
Well, let me be polite. They are not Premier Eby's coasts or BC's coast. They're Canada's coast. And in fact, we've done this kind of thing before to develop out our coast export capacity. Peter Lougheed did it back in the late 70s, early 80s, when he wanted to have an additional grain export terminal. He got 6 grain companies together and he provided loan guarantees, and they built a $277 million grain export terminal, mostly with the backing of the Alberta government. And when you look at where Port of Prince Rupert is today, it's one of the most important ports, not only for Alberta, but also Saskatchewan and further east. So I would say that this is just a new version of a same old story. Sometimes this is what has to happen. Sometimes that in order to get our products to market, we've got to step in. In this case, we'd be prepared to underwrite an Indigenous investment through the AIOC, our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. But this is going to be important for all of Canada. It's not just important for one province. It's important for all of us.
Well, any port would be to the benefit of British Columbia. That's where the jobs would be, and tanker jobs and tugboat jobs. And I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but it's a very serious industry. The Port of Vancouver is enormous. By the way, there are oil exports from the Port of Vancouver without incident for decades. I think Premier Eby is a bit of a scaremonger. Here's the thing. He can have all that bluster because Mark Carney has not calmly set things right. I think that Mark Carney is delegating or is allowing the premier to imply that he has the constitutional power to stop this pipeline. He's not willing to stand up for it, even though it's clearly has Mark Carney given David Eby a veto?
I would hope not, because certainly the Supreme Court has rendered their opinion on this. We came together as a nation with the trade and commerce power being vested in the federal government exactly to avoid one province blocking another's access to export markets. And so this is a federal power. The ports are a federal power. Cross-border pipelines are a federal power. And the courts have determined that. That's part of the reason why Trans Mountain got built in the first place, because for all the bluster of previous British Columbia premiers, it became very clear that if this is a project of national interest and that the technical issues are dealt with, the consultation issues are dealt with, then we can build these kinds of major projects. And that's what we're hoping for. I mean, we're either going to get a yes or we're going to get a no. And what I have said is that if we can get to a point where this is on the major projects list, I have every confidence that the major pipeline companies, either one or all of them, will come forward in a consortium to build it with private sector money. If the answer is no, then I guess we have to do a little soul searching about what Canada means. If it means everybody gets to get their products to market except Alberta, and every product gets to market except bitumen, then we've got to really scratch our heads about why we would leave $9 trillion worth of value in the ground when the world wants it. So I'm hoping the answer is not no, but we are certainly pushing to get an answer on the table very soon.
By connecting businesses with qualified candidates, Workforce Alberta helps employers change their story.
You know, in terms of international law, which is sort of a funny area, landlocked countries are considered to have a right to get to sea. And to cut off a landlocked country is tantamount to an act of war. And treating Alberta, a sister province, as if it can be punished and embargoed like some military lockdown is so crazy. It would be as if Alberta were to say, okay, we're going to shut down the Canadian Pacific Railway lines. Nothing imported from the Port of Vancouver gets to go to Ontario. We're going to shut down the Trans-Canada Highway. Like, that's insane. If Alberta were to do that, I bet the feds would deploy the military to keep those lines open. But there is no moral, ethical, legal, constitutional difference between David Eby blocking a pipeline and you, in some alternative universe, blocking a road and a railway.
Well, and I'll add to that. We've been selling 5 BCF a day of British Columbia gas through Alberta, through pipelines into the U.S. market at great expense to us. I mean, the flooding of gas into our market has depressed our prices to the point where they have often traded below $1, sometimes even into the negative. But, you know, that's part of the reason why we've been so supportive of seeing LNG export, because now all of that BC gas will have an international destination. We might be able to restore Alberta markets, but this is just it. We've always had a quid pro quo. There are reasons why we built the highway and the rail lines and the port system, and it was because we wanted to make sure that we were forging a nation so that we could be independent from the United States. And this is exactly the same conversation we're having today, is are we going to be a nation independent from the United States, develop new markets, develop and be able to get all of our resources to market working together, or are we not? That is really what we have to do. There's been a lot of people wrapping themselves in the Canadian flag and playing Captain Canada, at least when it comes to being behind a podium. But when it comes right down to it, this is what it looks like. It means supporting each other to get major projects of national interest built. And that's what I would be, that's what I'm encouraging the Prime Minister to give some clarity on.
Yeah, the Premier of BC was part of the Team Canada response to Trump when it got him votes. But frankly, if you look at his actions, stopping Alberta oil, But boy, he'll give a ferry contract to the Chinese Communist Party in a heartbeat. Very, very heartbreaking. Hey, I want to ask a related question. It's about the consultations you've had in Alberta these past months. I think you called it Alberta Next, going across the province, different facilitators. It's very interesting. Very grassrootsy people. Giving you an earful. How is that going? Because I would think that the way Mark Carney responds to your good faith initiative to get oil to the ocean, I think that would, I think that the pulse of Albertans would change very much based on that. Are you going to hold back a little bit on that? What's your plan for that Alberta Next consultation?
Well, we have finished all of our consultations in person, as well as our final one, which was online. And we have heard from, it's a very polarized environment. We've heard from people who don't want any discussion about that might threaten the unity of Canada. And then we've heard others who have said that they're fed up with Canada and they don't have faith in it anymore. I put myself in the middle, saying I think Canada can work, but we probably have to go back to the powers as that are listed in the Constitution. We've got to get the federal government back in its own lane, doing the things that it is empowered with, stay out of our lane, but more importantly, start building the strategic infrastructure we need in order to enable us to get to markets. So I guess this is a really important pivot point for the Prime Minister. He's got to decide if he's going to continue the ruinous policies of his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, that has kept Alberta back for the last 10 years, or whether he's going to work with us to truly make us not only an economic superpower, but an energy superpower. And I think that it now falls to him. And I agree with you. I believe that he would see that separatist sentiment dissipate if he demonstrated some goodwill towards Alberta and demonstrated an ability and a willingness to work with us on this thing. Because remember, it's not just about an ideological issue and how people feel about emissions. That's part of the reason why I put these two things together, is we can reduce emissions as well as increase our markets. This matters to Albertans. When you do not have the ability to develop a pipeline, you don't have the ability to maintain your job. We just saw a bunch of layoffs at Imperial Oil. Well, guess what? We could restore a lot of those energy sector jobs if we were doubling our energy development in both oil and gas. So people are seeing that and they're frightened because everyone knows what it looks like when a person loses their job. Everyone knows what it feels like when they don't know how to support their families. Everyone, and we are feeling it. We, along with other provinces, are running deficits because the federal government overtaxes all of us. I think mismanages the money, and we don't have the authority over our own revenue generating to be able to pay for our areas of constitutional authority as well. So it's a bit of a mess. That's why we have to get back to getting the feds raising money in its area of jurisdiction for the things it's supposed to do well, and then allowing the provinces more latitude and freedom to raise the money they need to take care of all the social programs, as well as develop their economy so they can get new sources of revenue. It's a pretty clear pathway forward to me, but I would say that it really is up to the Prime Minister to decide which direction he's going to go. He's got a choice to make.
I remember Preston Manning wrote an op-ed, I think it was in the Globe and Mail, before the election, saying if Mark Carney won, he could be the very last Prime Minister of United Canada. I was sort of shocked by that, but I think Manning was implying that Mark Carney, because of his views on energy, his lifetime's work has been carbon taxes and net zero and stuff like that. Preston Manning was suggesting that if Mark Carney were to be the Prime Minister, that would end Canada. It would be such an attack on Alberta that Alberta would leave. And I know that the referendum legislation in Alberta now has a lower threshold. Are you worried that if Mark Carney holds the line against Alberta, and if this Team Canada Expand Markets thing was just puffery, are you worried that he's going to give winning conditions? Some people would say it's not a worry at all, it's a delight. But do you predict that that would give a boost to the separatist movement?
Well, I can tell you that there already is a petition campaign that's been put forward by the former Deputy Premier, Thomas Lukasik. And it's written the other way. It's, do you want to remain in Canada? He is operating under the old rules, had to get about 290,000 signatures in 3 months. And it sounds to me by recent news stories that he's almost there. And so that is a referendum on separation, because the question is, are you going to remain in Canada or do you want to leave Canada? That's the implications of that. It's the same question that was asked in the Brexit referendum. And look what happened there. So been trying to do everything I can to make people, the status quo is not having enough signatures for a petition campaign like that. But it does look like it is heading in that direction. And when it does come right down to it, we'd be looking at probably, if the signatures are collected and verified, we'd be looking at having something in the spring. So there is a very narrow window here for the Prime Minister, I think, to take the error out of that side of the vote. But so far, with what'd you say, 204 days, we've seen very, very little progress on any of the issues we've raised.
By providing access to job training and support, Work First Alberta helps job seekers change their story.
I know you've only got about 5 more minutes before you have to go, but let me switch gears a little bit. A few weeks ago, by executive order, Donald Trump added Antifa to the list of terrorist organizations under the Department of Homeland Security. We have not done so in Canada under our equivalent registry. Antifa continues to operate. In fact, incredibly, our reporter in Montreal was assaulted by Antifa just a week ago. Are you worried that we are allowing a kind of political violence in Canada? And we saw a horrific example of that in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Do you think that our government should dampen not necessarily the language, but the actions of Antifa, which is a violent organization expressly designed to get physical, to be kinetic? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can tell you, I don't know the extent to which Antifa and I guess their companion Black Bloc operate in Alberta. I've been watching them in North America for some time. I think they do have a presence in Eastern Canada. One of the things that has happened in Alberta is we have a Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. And so we don't allow critical infrastructure to be blocked. You can't block borders, you can't block rail lines, you can't block highways, and our police do enforce that. So anytime we have seen that kind of action take place, I've been happy to see that our police forces have stepped in. We also enforce trespass. When there were very loud and disruptive protests happening at the university campuses, they said, "Hold on, you got to be a student to be here, and there's no camping overnight."
Right.
And so what happened is both the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta said it's fine to protest, but you have to protest within the rules. And they took down whatever blockades or barricades that there would have been, and I think they kept a relatively peaceful environment for the sides to be heard. And that's been our experience in Alberta, is you've got to make sure that there are lines. And the lines are: don't be violent, don't trespass, don't intimidate others, and make sure that you're not inconveniencing people or the economy by blocking critical infrastructure. Maybe there's others who would be able to benefit from doing the same. But I'll be watching it very closely, because there's no place for violence. When you're talking about peaceful protest, it's supposed to be peaceful. That's sort of the underscore, as opposed to just the protest and anything goes. I think that things have gotten a little too polarized in the U.S., and we're doing what we can to support freedom of speech on both sides. But there are some lines.
Last question. I understand you're having a meeting of the health ministers in Alberta in just over a week, which I think is interesting. And I love when they come to Alberta because they get a little dose of freedom. One of the things I think of when I think of health is a strange thing that happened under Trudeau, and Carney's keeping it, which is the legalization of marijuana. You can get it in any corner store almost. It's everywhere. And even the legalization of hard drugs in so-called safe supply areas. But at the same time, the same Liberal government has almost banned those little nicotine alternatives, those little pouches like Zyn. And you have to go to a pharmacy and you have to go through all these hoops. And I just don't understand how that makes sense when you have marijuana shops on every corner and you have hard drugs. That feels like an Ottawa knows best solution in an area of provincial jurisdiction. Would the province of Alberta do a libertarian thing and a sovereignty thing and say, you know what, we're going to let Ottawa do its thing, but in Alberta, we're going to be a little freer on nicotine alternatives?
I did just hear about that nicotine pouch in the last couple of weeks. I don't know enough about it, and I don't know if my minister has looked into whether or not we would make it available in Alberta. But what I can tell you is that we are not a safe supply province. We don't believe there's such a thing as a safe supply of crystal meth or fentanyl or opioids. We just don't. And so we've taken the approach of a recovery-oriented system of care. We give people treatment in our corrections facilities. We have them able to stay in a recovery community up for up to a year. We've got an opioid agonist therapy to get them off opioids with Suboxone and Sublocade. We're going to keep on doing that. So we have already charted a different path than what the federal government has proposed. But I'll have to just check back with my minister to see if there's any room for us to be able to have some flexibility when it comes to that particular issue.
Premier, I can't thank you enough for making the time to spend with our viewers today. I wish you good luck. And I think your fight for Alberta is actually a larger fight for freedom. And I think if you win this battle and get a pipeline to the coast, I think you'll actually, I know this sounds a bit dramatic, but I think contrary to Preston Manning's prediction, you'll, in a way, save the country. I think the stakes are that high. I wish you all the best.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear that so many Canadians are with us. 75% of Canadians believe pipelines should be built. So I would hope that all the politicians, federal and provincial, have a look at those results.
All right, Premier Smith, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ezra.